couple of other bits and pieces. You mentioned that stats on Harry Kane there, Paul.
Yeah.
There was a piece you liked there.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to watch. It's a hard thing to do, to watch a match and then put a figure out of 10 on how any individual played. For a start, to actually really understand how an individual played, you have to watch all the moving parts around them, and maybe somebody doesn't play well because everybody else is not working. But when you see somebody so transparently off the pace in a match and you award them 6, it does seem a bit striking, and it should be said in the Sunday Independent he was awarded 4, and that was probably just about right if you're being somewhat generous. But it's a hard thing, and it does beg the question in a poor match, and it was a poor match.
Yeah.
I think by anyone's standards. If you're a Liverpool fan, you don't mind. It was a compelling spectacle. You're living in a bag of nerves. Are your team going to hang on? If you're a Spurs fan, you know your team aren't playing great, and they weren't at their peak, but they still fought admirably to come back in the game. But if you're a neutral, there are games which are narrow and tight, which are compelling. And score draws can sometimes be just grip you and don't let go of you from start to finish. But this match was dull. The standard was poor, the passing was poor. There were occasional glimpses of brilliance. Mane had a great flick at one stage, a lovely trick, and I think it was Milner nearly scored from it. So there were little bits of quality. Yeah. But like Liverpool are a phenomenal team. They're a fantastic team to watch playing. But they played really poorly last night by their own standards.
That's the way it goes sometimes. Like, they played absolutely incredibly for 38 games of a Premier League season, came away with nothing. Didn't have the best day at the office, but look, they have a Champions League now. That's just sometimes the way it goes, isn't it? Like,
and that's the way of it.
It's just the way sport is.
If you're a Liverpool fan, you won't care.
Yeah, not
in the slightest bit. And fair, like, that's you can't condemn that. But I think if you're a neutral and you're looking for a spectacle, and I think that the hundreds of millions, for example, watching it on television last night, it's not a game that will live in the memory. No. It's not a game that you will consider a classic, and it can sometimes happen when you have 2 extraordinary semi-finals that the final is a damn squib. But there is another conversation, and it's about the Premier League, and it's about what happens in the Premier League and the quality of matches in the Premier League, and whether this was just like another fairly ordinary Premier League match.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a few common themes that kind of emerge over the course of all of the coverage today, and I think what everybody, and again bearing in mind that all of these pieces were written to really tight deadlines, I think the one thing, like, everybody is just trying to make sense of how the game devolved into what you've just described, this kind of fragmented game where Liverpool couldn't really compete with Spurs in midfield. Like, you know, Spurs kind of had control of the game in the midfield, but weren't really creating any meaningful chances up front. And I think it comes down to there's a few common themes that emerge. Like Chris Bascom's piece in the Sunday Independent focuses very much on kind of the psychology of the game, and talks about there's a line in it that, you know, another loss would consolidate modern Liverpool's position as the club that has developed an allergy to silver. Yeah. And that for all of Liverpool's legacy, and we saw it in all the flags and the banners that reference their glorious past, and you could see them draped across the stadium last night, that, you know, since 2005, since Istanbul in 2005, Liverpool have kind of developed a habit of being the bridesmaid, as Chris Bascom says, and a couple of Premier League runners-up finishes, a couple of beaten European finals, 2007, and last year lost the Europa League final. That, you know, there was a sense that, you know, that this club is nearly at a crossroads where last night it was either win and, you know, the future is bright, or lose and, you know, this perception of you as has-beens or nearly beens or what might have been really becomes impossible to shake. And I think that was pinpointed by a lot of journalists as kind of what led to kind of the nervousness that imbued Liverpool's play throughout. And for Spurs, on the other foot, there was the first Champions League or first European Cup final that led to a kind of a similar nervousness underrunning throughout their play. And then you had the game, as we kind of touched on at the top of the show, the game kind of irrevocably turned on its head after just 24 seconds because of a freak decision. And some of the, like Daniel Taylor describes that moment. He says Sissoko's pose was of a man looking the wrong way while he craned to change an invisible light bulb, which is a super line to sum it up. And Barney Renee, he chips in and he says Sissoko raised his right arm like a boxing padman offering a target to hit. And I think that moment, for what we debated the rights and wrongs of it at the start and whether Damir Skamina got it right or wrong, but I think that moment, the game is completely different from that moment on, and all plans are out the window, all bets are off, and the only way to make sense of kind of the fragmented, subpar, let's be honest, let's call a spade, like two teams that played below their best, is a combination of probably those two teams, the nerves that would have been there regardless, and then this game where all of a sudden the game you're preparing for only lasts for 24 seconds and you have to deal with a completely different set of circumstances. Is
the aim now in the Champions League aim for the arm?
Well, if you're in the box and
you're
like
a smart tactic now,
and someone, a defender, is standing in front of you, by the rules, you clip it off the arm, you've got a chance.
Just play a little.
It doesn't have to be a whole pile, but you've got a chance. And the arm in an unnatural position. Like, how do you judge that? Like that becomes very sloppy. And does it only apply for VAR decisions to do with penalties? Because do you remember in the first half when Andy Robertson was running out towards the wing and he kind of sent his arm backwards and he clipped a Spurs player, was a Trippier in the face. Now, he barely touched him, right? And in any rational conversation, it's not even close to a sending off. But at the same time, his arm was in an unnatural position and he hit a Spurs player in the face. So if you're going to give soft penalties, where do you stop the lines? Is this going to just keep going and going and going? And the notion that VAR will kind of, it will improve some things. It will, particularly for offside, and you can see that. But there are decisions around penalties which are essentially subjective decisions, which will remain subjective off the pitch as well as on it. And people you will end up still with contentious decisions. It's not just going to change.
Yeah, it's the one part of the game really that VAR is never really going to be able to put a black and white decision on. Handball, there's always going to be people saying it was accidental, arms in an unnatural position. You're trying to gauge intent off a video replay. It's very hard to do. And obviously there are things like offside for maybe clear fouls and stuff. It's, a lot of the time it's going to be fairly obvious. Handball is always going to be a grey area.
There's always going to be, and it can't clear that up.
Yeah.
And when you slow, it's like everything. We saw, you mentioned the Paris Saint-Germain United game. Like, actually, the first couple of replays I saw of Sissoko's handball last night, I actually couldn't see the handball of it because
I thought it was kind of hitting here initially.
I saw it hit his chest, and it was only when I saw the fourth or fifth angle where his arm actually comes down onto it. And like, if you slow anything down, like this point has been made many times, like if you slow anything down to freeze frame, of course you're going to find, or you're going to read into it, intent where there maybe is no intent, or you're going to see something that looks crystal clear where in real time you're like, well, sure, how could I have seen that? It's impossible for the naked eye to pick it out with that level of clarity. And I don't know, I think VAR and the rules as they are now, it runs the risk of, yes, everything looks like a handball when you analyse it in such minute detail, and that's not good for the game. That's not, it doesn't, like...
Well, we're going to talk about it an awful lot.
Yeah.
Like this is going to happen year after year now. It's not going to change that. I think in respect to what you were saying earlier about this being a huge psychological win for Liverpool, I think that's true. But I do think even if they had lost, I think there is a team in Liverpool there that has really come a huge step forward. I think it's a much better team even than it was last year. I think that, and it's way better than the Istanbul teams and around there, and it's clear that there are building blocks now in place in Liverpool where they will win a league in the next couple of years, and particularly Guardiola doesn't have a long shelf life in any club that he stays at. When he slips away from City, what's going to happen there?
But how many psychological knocks can a team like that take? How many times can you... And I absolutely accept what you're saying, and this is the best, on paper, it's the best Liverpool squad and the best Liverpool manager that the club has had in 20, 30 years. I don't think there's any disputing that. But those things have to chip away and undermine your confidence. No matter how well you're playing, you basically did absolutely everything right over a 38-game season and still came up short because you're playing against one of the greatest club sides that the game has seen. And then you go into a Champions League final where you're unusually you're the favourites, because Liverpool haven't been favourites really in most of the European finals that they've played in of late. And again, if you come up short, like how that must be a very damaging, debilitating thing for them to try and rebuild on next season.
I think that's absolutely fair. But I think Liverpool were so good in the league, got such an outrageous number of points, and just fell short. I think they would have taken a huge amount of confidence from that. They now know they are good enough to win a league.
Yeah, and like, where does it leave Spurs? I mean, we're kind of talking about what might have been for Liverpool. Like, Spurs have had a good campaign considering the injuries they have had. I know they might have felt that, you know, at one point a couple of months back in January, February, it looked like they were going to sustain a real title challenge and kind of push Liverpool for second place, and that tapered off. They've got to a European Cup final with Mauricio Pochettino. They've done it, you know, missing Harry Kane for the last few months of the season. You know, Son and Lucas Moura really stepped up when they needed. Where does it leave Spurs for next year? Like, with the psychological impact that we've just discussed that might have been there for Liverpool, is that going to be as significant, as severe for Spurs when they come back now in a few weeks' time for pre-season and try to go again?
You'd imagine with Spurs, it's the sense that they need 3 or 4 players. In a way, like Liverpool brought an amazing goalkeeper and a brilliant centre half. I would say Spurs might need a new goalkeeper, and they could probably do with a really quality midfielder. And if they get both of those things, then again you'd imagine they'll take a step forward as well.